We're live? All right. Well, the Senate Revenue Committee will please come to order. First bill up for our consideration is House Bill 174, Homestead Exemption Amendment, sponsored by the good Representative Andrew. Oh, Judy, you want to dispense a roll real quick? Sorry, I've missed a step.
Here. Here.
Here. Here. Okay, now that that's over with. Welcome to Revenue, Representative Andrew. Please explain us this good little bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I bring to you House Bill 174, which is not a tax bill, but sounds very much like one. So have to clear that up a lot. But this is essentially a bill that lifts the homestead exemption for debt and civil liabilities. So in statute, there's already an exemption of up to $20,000, which is protected so that in the event where you have unsecured debt and someone comes to collect it, you're at least entitled to that amount. The original statute was put into place in 1886 with $10,000 as the limit. Adjusted to inflation, that makes it about $315,000 if we were just to put an inflation adjustment in here. Originally, I had written the bill just removing it because 7 other states have an unlimited homestead exemption. In House Committee, we brought that down to increasing it just to $50,000. On the floor, we were able to bring that up to $100,000. And Mr. Chairman, this applies specifically to unsecured debt, so it does not include like your mortgage, where you're holding your home as an asset. It doesn't allow anybody to squat in their house and not pay their mortgage. In a different part of Wyoming statute, 34-121, there's another provision where if someone needs to basically waive their right to do this in order to secure a loan, they can. So, you know, for any worries that this would make it more difficult for someone to get a loan, there are ways around it. But what this is really needed for, I see as like the prime example, is when you get a business loan, an SBA loan specifically, you know, even though you have an LLC and you should be protected by a corporate veil, often you're required to sign a personal guarantee, which is then, you know, you voluntarily piercing the veil so that they can come collect from you personally in the event of that default. And what this bill would do is it would at least protect somebody in that situation who has signed that, who has defaulted on their loan, from having, you know, pretty much literally everything taken from them and the sale of their house forced. And that is the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions for the good representative? Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious on why the $100,000 figure and not the entire value of the home.
Representative,
I'm sorry. If it's really aimed at protecting against piercing a corporate veil, that's a dirty little game in itself, and then come up with the reasons you bought a postage stamp on the wrong day. So I was just curious what your appetite for the whole value is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen. That's how I originally wrote it. I wanted to protect the entire value of someone's home. I think that originally thought that that was important because, you know, if you live in certain areas of the state, your home might be very valuable. However, this was the will of the other body was to increase it from the unreasonably low number that it is now to something higher, but they were uncomfortable with bringing it up to what I had originally in the bill, and that's where we are, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ide?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Andrew, my thoughts are going the same way. What was it original in the bill? I mean, I like your inflation adjusted as far as, from 10,000 to 300 plus. And can you explain a little bit how you backed off of that? Thank you.
Representative Andrew?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, originally we just crossed out the language where it stated the limit, and just took that out entirely. Something to note is that it does double for a married couple, so this could be a $200,000 exemption if both spouses are on the title of the home. But essentially, I wanted to at least get something out of this, to have something that would pass the floor, pass committee. And so I essentially agreed to let them change it to whatever they felt comfortable with. They worked out a few numbers, and $50,000 is what they came up with in committee. And then I tried to up the bargain a little bit on the floor and got it to 100. So I'm certainly comfortable with whatever you want to do with it here as well.
Senator French?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. So if I go bankrupt, this is ensuring I end up with $100,000 worth of value, correct?
Representative?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, it would depend on exactly how you went bankrupt. If you defaulted on your mortgage, this would not apply. It's specifically exempted later on in this statute. So if you have so this applies, let me say this. So this applies to unsecured debt. This does not apply to secured debt. So going back to the SBA example, a lot of times it's just almost a formality that you have to sign a personal guarantee in that situation. So, and what you're really doing is opening up all of your personal assets to collection in that situation. But I think that often people don't necessarily realize the gravity of that situation and just how much they really are signing over. And it's usually a very quick action. Just, oh, here's sign here. This is nothing. But if you had specifically taken out a loan against your home, you had signed an agreement with the bank that this was going to be used as something they could collect for repayment of the debt, at that point, they could take it because you have made that agreement. It was consensual on both sides. It was very real, and everybody knows exactly what they're doing.
Follow up, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
follow up.
So I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this. So the unsecured debt that you spoke of, you could end up with 100,000. I guess where I'm going with this is, aren't you supposed to pay your bills, pay what you owe out there? Anyway.
Do you want to tell us about secured, unsecured debt? Because that seems to be what the question is. Is it truly unsecured debt if your house, if they can come at your homestead? I think is that what you're asking?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, I'm sorry.
Senator McEwen, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Or a
I'm gonna ask you if you'll agree with me.
Okay.
I think the intent of the bill and understanding corporate structures or LLCs, how this would work is, let's say my grocery store goes bankrupt and I can't pay the bills there anymore. But since I formed, and I'll tell you, I'm an S Corp. But since I'm formed as an S Corp, it protects them from coming to get my house. So it's not necessarily not paying the bills. And if my house is worth $50,000, only 50,000 would be written off. They wouldn't give me a check for 100,000 or 50 more thousand. What they would do is just keep the two entities, my personal life and my corporate life, separate. And I think that's what this is aimed at. Am I tracking correctly? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative?
Mr. Chairman, Senator McEwen, to some extent, I guess in the way that this would apply is that if your business did not have enough assets that they could go after to pay for the debt, and you have signed a personal guarantee, they would start coming after your assets personally. And if you had less than, we'll use what it's at now, $100,000 of equity in your home, they couldn't force the sale of your home because you're at least entitled to that much equity. If you had over $100,000 of equity, they could force the sale of your home because there's some equity there that they could get at. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, going back to Senator French's question, I guess one reason that we would want to do this is because it really sets someone back if you're getting their house and you're forcing the sale of their house, there is a cost to society with that. If someone is homeless, I looked up the numbers, it ends up costing the government about $35,000 a year. So, the government does have some interest in protecting at least some value in a person's home.
Thank you. Senator Wright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, I'll kind of hit on some of those things. I've got some experience with it, not getting my house taken from me, but so Senator McEwen mentioned, the business, and whether it's a C Corp or an LLC, you do a mortgage on your business, whether it's a piece of real estate, in my case, commercial, then you sign the mortgage and note as the LLC, but then the bank wants a personal guarantee on top of that. And so this exemption would protect that personal guarantee effectively. They couldn't come after your home. And I think that's pretty much the long and short of your bill. Thank you.
Wouldn't you agree, Representative
I would
Andrew?
agree, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any more questions, comments, concerns? Thank you, Representative Andrew. Good job.
Thank you.
Stick close in case we need you back, unless you have to run to another committee. Okay. Anybody from the agencies wish to testify? I don't see any other representatives or senators here. Don't see anybody from the agencies. General public comment. Anybody interested in testifying on this bill? Bankers. Welcome back to revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. So maybe I can shed a little bit of light on some of the questions and kind of where we're at. The bringer of the bill did reference a little bit about the bankruptcy code. I will tell you that the homestead exemption applies throughout banking law in a lot of different places, not just the bankruptcy code. But that's primarily where most of the litigation takes place. And so that's where a lot of the discussion and where case law and where everything else applies. It was back when, $10,000. And then in 2005, there was a complete rewrite of the United States Bankruptcy Code. And part of that code was rewritten because of a certain individual that happened to play for USC as a running back, then became an NFL running back and did phenomenal things, and then was accused of killing his wife and his girlfriend. And what happened then was that we put a lot of the assets, that individual put a lot of the assets, if not all of his assets, into a home in a state where there's unlimited exemption, prohibiting any type of creditor coming after that person. So the question in my mind is that really what we're intending to do? So I think an unlimited exemption makes no sense, because there are other people that are out there paying attention to what's going on. And we're not talking just about your average run-of-the-mill guy or gal that's trying to do stuff in their own business. We're talking about really hiding assets. So it does make sense that you have a limit on there. In 2012, we set the limit in Wyoming at $20,000. And Wyoming opted out of following whatever the federal regulations are, because we like to do, as I like to refer to as Wyoming's home cooking. We take things as we want to do them, and we do them as we like to see fit. So in 2012, we raised it up to $20,000. Now that is individually. So a couple, husband and wife, or whomever, would have $40,000. It makes sense that over the last 10 years that home values have increased, and we saw especially true during COVID, when we saw a lot of property increase in Wyoming. And it's not even in our favorite high rent district to the west side of the state, but it's all over the place. And there's a lot of home values that went considerably higher. So it does make sense that we do something to make that adjustment. But 500% seems to be a bit much. So you look at it and you say, okay, what does make sense? Well, if we doubled it, you'd be at 40,000 per person. And the idea was that why don't we stick with 50? That makes some difference in there. But that would allow two people to shelter up to $100,000 of value. Now, why is that important? At least with respect to the banks. And I think that the bringer of the bill does make a good point in that this is unsecured debt. So if I decided I want to go out and buy myself a new boat, well, the bank would probably look at me and say, okay, let's see if you got the assets necessary to justify it. Banks look at 3 C's. They look at whether you have the capacity to repay. They look at what the collateral is, and they look at what your character is. Well, the collateral is an important part of that decision. If you look at the bank, if you tell the bank, I have a lot of equity in my home, the bank may look at me and say, I think you can buy the boat, you have everything else there. And by the way, we do know that you have some equity in your home, if that's the case, that may be, because otherwise it's only secured by the boat. But if I take that asset away and you can't look at that anymore, or at least up to the extent of what's being proposed is up to $200,000 for a married couple, then the bank has to really look at it and say what assets are available. That one's not there. That may adjust the risk idea, may adjust the interest rates, may adjust a lot of different things. And in fact, I believe it takes away from those who probably can least afford it to have the ability to go get unsecured loans versus somebody that can say, look, I got the cash, I don't need to worry about it. So it does have an impact on. Now you look at it and you say, okay, now at this point in time, what does this do to the lending institutions? Well, that means that when you come in and you want to buy the boat, I'm going to ask you not only to to sign over the rights of the boat in case you can't pay for it, but now I'm going to ask you to also sign an additional mortgage. Now you may not be first, but you'll be in there, or maybe there'll be clauses now in the mortgage that allow you to increase that. If you borrow money and you have it, property, at least in Wyoming, secured by a mortgage, but like in other states, they have deeds of trust. But when you have that secured, the promissory note is not necessarily recorded, but all the details are recorded on the mortgage. So now everything that you want to do has now become made public because that mortgage is a public document. And everything you do now is going to be subject to those mortgages. And that's probably where a lot of this will go when you have it such a high amount. If the bank feels like it's going to have higher risk, then we start asking for more collateral. And that's only just a natural business sense. I do respect and I really admire Senator McCowan, your comment about corporate structure or LLC, because a lot of people don't understand the difference. But I think the bringer of the bill is right. When you go through and you apply for a loan, and even for an SBA loan, they ask you for a personal guarantee. Makes sense. I don't want you just forming an LLC or something and then walking away from that knowing that it's completely sheltered. But when you do that and you sign that personal guarantee, if you have such a high exemption on there, then your personal guarantee is going to also be a mortgage on it, and that's not going to protect anybody. It's going to take it because you've now secured it with a mortgage. And the bank can turn around and say, I'm going to foreclose on the mortgage because whatever terms are in there, you've now made it more complicated. You've made it now more difficult. Now the bank feels like there's a higher risk. So now we're going to make sure that we have that. I do believe that it ought to go up, like I say, doubling it from 2012 to now, 10 years later, from $20,000 per person to $50,000 makes a lot of sense. But to dump it up there to make it, like I said, 5 times, that sounds like an awful big jump. But it will add complexity to a loan agreement. It will add complexity to how you collateralize those loans. So I think that there is that. There is also the other option, and I think that we failed to even look at, but under those personal exemptions, not only is it a homestead exemption, but there are exemptions for tools. Those would be much more important to somebody that's out there working, is to protect their tools. And yet we have not done anything with that. That's $4,000. Well, you probably can't buy, a welder can't buy all equipment, or whoever else can't buy all that, replace that equipment for $4,000. That probably does need to be up considerably. And the same for a vehicle. Right now, the exemption for your vehicle is $5,000. I don't think you can buy a decent car for $5,000 nowadays. So that probably needs to go up as well, but we're not dealing with that. What we're trying to do here is apparently protect the home, but this is a business transaction. How much do you want to put into your business? If you really don't think that you're secure enough in your own business plan that you're not willing to pledge that, then maybe that's not a very good business plan. And I'm not trying to make judgment calls. I'm just saying from a bank's viewpoint, when we look at it, we have to look at what assets are available, what that collateral is, and what kind of risk is being assessed. So I do think that the $100,000 is a bit high. I do think it needs to be raised. And that's why I think that the agreement was on the House side was to make sure that we got it up there. So that's why it was at $50,000. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I certainly stand for any questions.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, thank you. So, Mr. Meyer, of what I'm getting out of your testimony is perhaps we're actually, by raising it as high as we are, we may be making it harder for those who can marginally afford it to get loans. If somebody's wealthy enough to do whatever they want, it's not going to affect them. But what I'm hearing, I think that if we were back at the 50,000, it would be easier for folks who are on the lower end of the spectrum. Is that correct?
Mr. Meyer?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, you're exactly right. I mean, that's the whole point of looking at what assets are available should the bank say you're not being able to buy the camper that you want to take hunting or the equipment that you need for your business or whatever. They have to make sure that they look at what collateral is available. And if you want to take that arrow out of the quiver, then it'll definitely impact what the bank assesses as the possible risk.
So, Mr. Meyer, it sounds like there isn't any such thing as unsecured debt anymore then. If you're asking for collateral, that's a secured asset now, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, if you, instead of just jacking up the interest rate, if you think that the person may be a risk, because I always thought interest rates were, your risk payment. Now you're talking, well, we're going to charge you more interest, but we're also going to ask for not just say you're buying a boat, you use the boat as an example. Not just using the boat as collateral, now you're going into, you're going to charge more interest, then you're going to look at the other assets. So that's not really unsecured debt at that point. So you're justifying the higher interest rate by calling it unsecured debt, but you're asking for collateral on top of that. Am I missing something?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, a little bit. If in fact that, and another item, example of unsecured debt is I see a lot of these financial institutions offer a line of credit so that you don't bounce a check. That is not secured with anything. So if you say, well, here it is, if in fact the lender cannot look at all the assets that are available, everything over the homestead exemption. Then what happens is that they say, well, we offer this for everybody that's well secured, what have you, at 5%. We may have to make it 6%. We wouldn't ask then for an additional lien on the collateral, more collateral. But if you wanted to bring it back down to 5, then maybe that's would make a reason to bring it down. So I don't know if you'd have both of them, but you might have either or. So if that's the case, then you would say, geez, if you're willing to put your home on there, so what you're going to actually get is a HELOC. Well, then those interest rates are considerably lower than just your overdraft protection on your account because it's secured by your mortgage in your home.
Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my frustration with this is, in order to file, let's say as a C Corp, I'm going to start out as a C Corp. And I'm going to incorporate everything in the business. I don't own any of it. And then I'm going to sign my personal assets away. And there goes the first swing of the ping pong ball. And then I go to the other side of the table, and here's the federal government. Oh, you're a C Corp, 40% tax rate. So if I go a whole year and I make $1, I'm going to give the federal government 40%. So in my view, and I'm asking you if you think I'm wrong, when the government set up those organizations, and we won't get into puncturing the corporate veil, because we could be here all night on that. But at the end of the day, if I'm formed as a certain corporation, in order to protect my personal assets, the federal government is taxing me at a much higher rate for that protection. So now I'm getting knocked back over to the banker. So, I understand what you're saying about secured versus unsecured, but you got one promise at one end of the ping pong table and another promise at the other end. If I sign up as a C Corp or even an S Corp, I should be protected from my personal assets solely by the tax rates the government's going to charge me. And really, and here's my question, the only reason I would incorporate or set up as an LLC is not because I like to pay higher tax rates, it's to protect my personal assets. Wouldn't you agree? Thank you, Mr.
Meyer?
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I would agree with you. You as a business person know that many of us who are small business owners, we have the very big privilege of paying everything to get formed. We have the privilege of paying every bill before we get any money. And then we have the privilege of paying to get out of the business when we're ready. So it's not necessarily a fair system, and I would agree with you. This only, however, just deals with lending. And so any lender that wants to lend money is going to make sure at some point in time, they're going to assess the risk, and then they're going to figure out what the return is on that risk based upon where they're at. So even if you set up a corporation and you say, and whether it doesn't make a difference to me whether it's a C Corp or an S Corp, but if you set up an entity like that to protect yourself, what you're really protecting against is Joe Blow down the street from coming to sue you and take everything you have. It has nothing to do with doing the lending, because the lender is going to look at you and say, you have assets in the business, then I can use that. Sometimes they'll lend you lines of credit or whatever based upon your receivables. That's fine. But when you're a brand new business, and I've gone through it a couple of times in my life, then yes, here's what I need, and I want to make sure I have a line of credit. Then they say, fine, your assets, or we want to have a lien on those, whether you do a UCC filing or a mortgage or whatever, if that's what the business has. But they, knowing full well that that may not be enough, they're going to ask me to sign as a guarantor. And when I do that, they're going to say, your signature is really nice, Mr. Meyer, but we're not going to take that as gospel. We're going to make you sign over, or at least put the rights to your property.
All right. Last question, Mr. Meyer. So there's 7 states, I believe, Representative Andrews said, that have an unlimited exemption. You mentioned California as one of them. I don't know if they still are. How do people get loans in those states? Has lending shut down for unsecured loans in those states?
Mr. Chairman, the only one that I'm aware of right now is Florida, and that's where that individual bought their home.
Okay.
The way that they deal with that then is that they make sure they have liens, a mortgage on every bit of property that you have, so that when they make the loan and you default, they have an avenue by going after the property. And that seems, okay, that's maybe one option. But like I say, having a mortgage that has all of those additional liens on it, having a real property with all the additional liens on it, now makes it a little bit more complicated to sell that property because you got everybody with their hand out. And on top of that, what bothers me too is the fact that that mortgage agreement, every time that you do something like that and you record it, it has on there up to this amount at this interest rate that you'll be making these payments, and failure to do so is a default. And that all is public record.
Yes, Senator McEwen, you have another question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did that guy drive a white Bronco?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Mr. Meyer.
Here's my serious question. So I understand the position you're in too, as a banker. What I don't like is that if somebody takes out an SBA loan, for example, whether that personal guarantee is required or not, to get the SBA loan, they have to sign their personal assets away anyway to the same group who's going to tax them at a higher rate to protect them from not losing their personal assets. So that's where I'm chewing on this. And if I'm confused, please tell me.
Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, anything that has to do with federal taxation is confusing. And I've been doing it for 40 years. There is no rhyme or reason. There used to be whatever we tried to do is say, this is what we're going to do, support the government. Now taxation is used to implement policy. And it's exactly the wrong reason that they do it, but that's what happens. They want to direct policy one way, so you might get a credit for something that has absolutely no sense, but that's where they want you to do that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate your testimony. Who's next? Anybody wish to come? Oh, boy. All right, we'll hear from the credit unions and then we'll hear from the Farm Bureau. How about that? They can arm wrestle too. Okay. Welcome to Revenue. Please introduce yourselves.
I'm Shane Schultz on behalf of the credit unions. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Okay, all right, perfect. I was gonna say, I don't want to belabor the point too much here. I know that Mr. Meyer spoke eloquently to many of the issues that we feel the same way about. I think the issue of getting to a much larger exemption just creates pressure on a homeowner or someone who's trying to borrow money to come up with other creative ways for financial institutions to help secure that debt. And so it puts more pressure. It's similar to the question that Senator Papas asked. And we feel consistent with that. And I do agree that while it's not the purview of this bill, I think that going and looking at the exemptions regarding tools and vehicles and other things as far as a person's ability to have a job and generate revenue and get out of the situation is an important one to make sure that someone looks at, whether it's this committee or an individual. Lastly, I think the number of 50,000 is something that we're comfortable with going up to and agree with. I think when you get much higher than that, that's where we start to get a little nervous with what we can go back on as far as securing that asset. Because even though a mortgage is a consensual loan and it's still secured, even in the case of a Chapter 7, we still are going to make sure that we recover what we've loaned on. It's just a bigger issue of what it means to loan for other items, whether it be a business you're trying to form or a toy you want to buy. So.
Thank you. Senator McEwen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. Of the home loans you give out, how many would you say are conventional loans, just a percentage, versus FHA or VA or anywhere else that's guaranteed the payment back? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I don't have the answer to that
Mr.
question, but I'm happy to track. Mr. Chairman,
Mhm.
Senator McEwen, I'm happy to track that answer down for you, but I don't have it at my fingertips today. I apologize.
Okay. What else? Mr. Schultz, is it common practice amongst credit unions as well to go after more security than the actual item being bought and raise it using interest rates in the actual, boat or camper or whatever the loan is for? Is it common practice to go after other assets, or are those days over with? Where you just use the boat as collateral and charge a higher rate if you feel like it's a higher risk?
Mr. Chairman, I think depends on the item and the depreciation schedule of that item. In the case of a home, obviously you have appreciation. If you're looking at an item that has accelerated depreciation, maybe a car or a boat, I think those items, our lenders and underwriters are going to make sure that there's a proper way that we can secure that collateral in a way that if we had to collect on it, that we can get paid fully for what the loan is.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Moline, welcome back to Revenue.
Seems to be kind of an old trick to be here at this committee.
And we enjoy having you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Looking at what this bill does, this bill takes the personal exemption for a homestead and it extends it from $20,000 to $100,000 per person. So if it's married, you have $200,000. That's what this bill does. All of the other aspects about, if you have a mortgage against it, I think we've covered that. This is being used as collateral for that loan. That's what this bill does. A lot of the other aspects that have been discussed, in my opinion, are outside the aspect of this bill. Having borrowed money and been with people that have borrowed money, I had two brothers and a brother-in-law that were bankers, so it didn't take me long to get turned down for a loan. But every one of them said that if you are going to loan money to somebody, if your primary aspect of that loan is collateral, you might not be looking at that loan correctly. The biggest thing when you're going to loan money to somebody is, can they pay it back? And again, I believe all these aspects are outside what this bill does. Mr. Chairman, sitting in support of this bill, I would take any questions you or the committee may have.
All right. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett, thanks for being here. This might not be a question for you. Just kind of thought about it. It might be for the bankers and the credit unions, but or the bringer of the bill. Is there any statistics on how often that an unsecured loan goes and they have to go for a deficiency for the private homeowner? That's my question. I don't know if anybody can answer that or not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I have absolutely no idea. That would be in the wheelhouse of another group of individuals.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to understand your testimony, and that you don't believe that by raising this limit to as high as it is, from the testimony we've heard, people are gonna have a more difficult time using their homes as collateral for any loan that they may try to get. And so you will be limiting folks from getting loans if they so chose. Because as I heard from the bankers, that $200,000 would be off the table, and so they're not gonna even look at that for collateral. And if those folks only have their home for collateral, then they're not gonna get that loan, or even your members. I just want to make sure I'm understanding you, why you're in support of the larger number rather than maybe something that's not quite as large. I think we all agree that, you know, we've got this, it's not like we're changing the law, right? All we're doing is changing the number. And I agree, we need to keep up with the, you know, the times, the inflation. But from going from, I mean, as the bill came out of the House committee, it was 250%, 250% hike, right? Now it's a 500% hike in 10 years. It seems, as the bankers mentioned, a little high. And so, you know, I'm comfortable with raising the number. My uncomfortableness is in how high we've raised it now. Because I think it's going to keep people that want to use this as a tool to get a loan, but now we're going to say no, because we're going to take that ability off the books for them.
Mr. Moline?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I guess I'm going to look at that in a little different aspect. There's two things about raising this up to this level right now. It'll be that much longer before it becomes an issue and you have to look at it again. You know, so if you raise it up this, it'll be a few more years down the road before you have to raise this issue. But getting back to, you know, the type of loan that you get, you know, if you can get a mortgage on your house to pay, you know, to start a business, to purchase a car, whatever, you can still do that. And if you get them, if I understand it correctly from what I've heard, that if your lending institution puts a mortgage or lien on your house, that level isn't, I hate to say meaningless, but they can still take your house because you've put your house formally under as collateral. So it's a lien against your house. It's not, you know, if you had liens against everything else but your house, they could take everything but your house. But if you've put your house up in a formalized contract through a mortgage, they can still take the value of the mortgage away from the value of your house. If you have a mortgage for $200,000, your house is worth $400,000, sell your house, you pay off the mortgage. You can still do that. But getting back to a lot of the bankers that I have worked with, they're more concerned about your cash flow. Now, starting a business is going to be a little bit different. You need that money up front to keep your business going till the funds come in. But at least with the lot of the loans I've done, is can you pay it back? Is the last thing they want to do, most bankers, is to take your working assets. They want you to have those so that you can generate money. So I hope I've answered that question. I don't believe that there will probably be some instances, but I think it's going to be more of a cash flow problem than a collateral problem. I go back to the late 1970s, 1980s. Senator French probably saw some neighbors suffer through this. Banks were loaning on what your assets were. And at that time, ag values were going up tremendously. A lot of people lost their farms, their ranches, their other businesses because too many of the bankers didn't look at cash flow. You know, this land might sell for $1,000, $5,000 an acre. How much money will you bring in the form of net revenue to pay back the loan? Too many people, and that was on both sides. It was the bankers and the consumers didn't look at that, and they lost it. Some of the times, the best thing that can happen for somebody that wants to get a loan is to be told no. They can keep what they have. If they get in and they keep getting extended and the cash flow isn't there. There was one of our neighbors that, you know, he ended up losing everything. If the banker would have told him no 5 years earlier, he would have had some equity. So I hope I've kind of answered your question, sir. Probably in a very roundabout way, and I apologize for that.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Any further questions for Mr. Moline before we let him go? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else wish to testify on House Bill 174? Judy? Anybody on Zoom? Somebody's on Zoom with no hand up, so if you want to, if you want to speak, now's your chance. If not, we'll move on. Okay. Public comment is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure? Move to pass by Ide. Second by McEwen. Any amendments? Page 1, page 2.
I'm wrestling with something
Senator McEwen?
for an amendment.
Yeah?
When I go back to the, hate to use the ping
Your
pong.
micro.
I'm wrestling with this in my mind because I go back to the ping pong table. We want to keep the banker in business too. And hold off the tax monster at the same time. So initially I was thinking we'd bump this up, but I think we should leave it at the 100,000 where it's at. It's kind of in the middle of what everybody on this committee seems to be kind of living in, sort of in the middle. So I'm not going to bring that amendment.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
you're welcome. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Echo some of those sentiments. I'm inclined to think that inflation over the last 125 years, the $300,000 number that was brought up, I don't, it seems like that would be on par with what we had when we originally started this thing. And it doesn't seem unreasonable to me. Hearing the testimony, we want to get something too that can pass. So I'm kind of wrestling with the ping pong table on this as well, as far as you would think that just the, inflation adjusted is where we should be, minimum. And we've got, I think I heard we've got 7 states that it's unlimited essentially. So that's my part of the input here. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
making sausage is not pretty.
Yeah.
Senator Pappas.
I agree with the need to change it. I mean, we haven't changed it in 10 years. It should be upped. My preference would be to do an amendment to take it back to the House version. That came out of the House committee meeting, but sensing that won't get through, I'm not going to waste our time. But I would prefer it to not be higher than the 100,000. I would prefer it to be back down to the House version, but just.
Yeah.
But I'm on a yay on the bill. I just wish it wasn't 100,000.
Well, I think the fact that none of us are happy is probably a sign we're getting to a compromised position here. I agree. I think if we're going to do this, we're probably not going to do this again for 20 years. My opinion would be to adjust it for inflation from when the original law was passed and be done with it. But knowing that that's not possible, I think you guys down in the House have landed on a number that's probably going to be where we're going to finish up at. So, question on the bill being called. Judy, will you please call the roll?
Aye.
Hi.
Aye. Thank you. House Bill 174 engrossed has passed. Senate revenue, looks like, I'm a co-sponsor on this. Okay. I will take this on the floor then. Sure. We are running out of time on, and I don't see anybody from the House for House Bill 98. Senator Pappas, you were on the Revenue Committee during the interim. If you feel comfortable walking us through the bill, you can have at it. If you want to lay it back till Tuesday or Thursday, certainly we can do that. We have, we're not exactly jammed up with bills at the moment, so we have plenty of time to, if you wanted to carry this over till Thursday, we could do that.
Well, frankly, I actually think this will probably have some pretty serious debate, probably more
Yeah.
than the last bill.
Okay.
So
I think we better give it its due consideration and go ahead and lay this back till Thursday. We can take it up Thursday.
Yeah, it's an important issue too, so.
Okay, I agree with that. So committee will lay House Bill 98 back to the next meeting. And that clears the desk. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.